بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to another class, another discussion. Inshallah, we are going to take about half of the next section, which is charging one's wife with adultery. Of course, this is a major issue, a major problem that based on it are a whole host of things that involve lineage and inheritance and uprightness to be considered a witness or not a witness anymore. And it's a very public event in which, as we will discuss, involves the community. So this is something that is not to be taken lightly. So basically in today's class we're going to take two parts of it. The first part is we're going to talk about the theory behind it, of course looking at the dalil, the asbab al-nuzul, the reason why the verses regarding this issue were revealed, a story that happened at the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu salam, and a little bit of sort of how that mechanism works. So a man charges his wife with adultery. That in and of itself is an offense against him. He could be lashed for that, 80 lashes. And we'll explain why that's the case. But if he does that, he either has to bring proof, or then he's punished, or he has to do the public swearing, which is another way to ward off the punishment from him. And then to reciprocate that, the woman can also do the public swearing. Now, the swearing part of the woman, we're going to delay that to the next lecture. So in today's lecture, we're going to talk about the theory behind it, and then we're going to go through the process of what, other than the proof, I mean, proof is proof, we kind of understand that, but other than the proof, what is this public swearing that the man has to do? He has to make 5 oaths, 5 public swears in the public square, in the mosque, etc. And the 5th one, he adds, may Allah Ta'ala's curse be upon me if I am lying, which is an enormous thing. So I want to walk you through that process and the fiqh behind it. So it's something that involves, there has to be like a magistrate or an imam or a mufti or a qadi that's doing that. They have to tell the man what to say. He has to say, I want to talk to you about that, why that's important. And we'll delay what results from that to the next class, so we just don't do too much fiqh in one class. I'll see you back here for the next lecture, or the first discussion, inshallah. So we begin the way we always begin, which is to turn to the text itself of Abi Shuja', Qadi Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. فصل في بيان أحكام القذف واللعان. وإذا رمى الرجل زوجته بالزنا فعليه حد القذف إلا أن يقيم البينة أو يلاعن فيقول عند الحاكم في الجامع على المنبر في جماعة من الناس أشهد بالله إنني لمن الصادقين فيما رميت به زوجتي فلانة من الزنا وأن هذا الولد من الزنا وليس مني 4 مرات ويقول في الخامسة بعد أن يعظه الحاكم وعلي لعنة الله إن كنت من الكاذبين ويتعلق باللعن 5 أحكام. Okay, so he says rahimahullah, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu, and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. He says, if a husband charges his wife with adultery, he is subject to punishment for charging another with adultery. So that's what I was saying in the introductory clip. Automatically, if you do that, then you are going to be punished. Unless he brings proof, which in the case of zina is, I want to talk about what that proof means, or makes a public imprecation, mula'ana, against her. And that's an important English word because that is the appropriate word in this case, a public imprecation. If he chooses to make the public imprecation, he says, while in the presence of a judge and a group, while standing on the mimbar, meaning in the mosque, I bear witness to Allah that I am truthful in charging my wife so-and-so with fornication, and that this child is a product of adultery and not mine. He says this 4 times. The 5th time, after the judge warns him of the consequences of lying, he says, and may the curse of Allah be upon me if I am a liar. 5 rulings are associated with his public imprecation. I mean, that part, I read that part, but we're not going to do that in today's class. Okay, so I mean, it's pretty dramatic stuff, pretty dark stuff, but again, it's the human condition that we deal with that sometimes, unfortunately, is dark. So, from the Dalil point of view, let me see if the Dalil book has the story. فصل رجل. Yeah. So, Hilal ibn Umayyah radiallahu anhu accused his wife publicly of, complained to the Prophet, accused his wife to the Prophet ﷺ, that his wife had fornicated with Sharik ibn Samha. Actually, it's not Samha, it's Sahma. I think that's a common mistake. Let me just verify that. Sorry, this is a small point, but yeah, Sahma بتقديم الحاء على الميم. So it's Sahma, not Samha. Samha means to be forgiving in Arabic, and I think it's common on the tongue that one would want to say Samha, but it's Sahma. His wife was, the other man was Sharik ibn Sahma. So that's actually a mistake in my book, but I'll correct that later. So the Prophet ﷺ told him, this is, by the way, this hadith is narrated in Bukhari. Al-bayyinata aw haddun fi dhahrik. You have to bring proof, or I'm going to enact the punishment on your back, meaning I will lash you. So Hilal said, وَالَّذِي بَعَثَكَ بِالْحَقِّ إِنِّي لَصَادِقٌ. I swear by Allah, by the one who has brought you with the truth, I am truthful. فَلْيُنَزِّلَنَّ اللَّهُ مَا يُبَرِّئُ ظَهْرِي مِنَ الْحَدِّ. And he says, and he was so confident, he said, and Allah will provide revelation, will reveal to you revelation that will alleviate me from the hadd punishment. فَنَزَلَ جِبْرِيلُ وَأَنزَلَ عَلَيْهِ. So Gabriel came to the Prophet ﷺ and revealed to him the following verses. وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَزْوَاجَهُم. So that's one of, and those verses are in Surah An-Nur, verse 6 to 9. Now, there's another story which is also related by Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Sahel ibn Sa'd, that a man came, أن رجلا من الأنصار جاء إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله أرأيت رجلا وجد مع امرأته رجلا أيقتله أم كيف يفعل. So a man came to the Prophet ﷺ from the Ansar, and he said to him, what happens if a man finds his wife with another man? Should he kill him, or what should he do? And kill them, or what should he do? So the Prophet ﷺ said, so فأنزل الله في شأنه ما ذكر من القرآن من أمر المتلاعنين. So then Allah Ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ those verses in Surah An-Nur. So the Prophet ﷺ told him, قَدْ قَضَى اللَّهُ فِيكَ وَفِي امْرَأَتِكَ. So the Prophet ﷺ told him, Allah Ta'ala has adjudicated between you and your wife. Now, the fact that, just a small point about proof text, and I think we kind of talked about this before, but it bears mentioning. Just because there are two stories that are different stories that are talking about the proof text does not negate that one of them is, that both of them are concurrently correct. So there could have been two stories, two independent stories that caused the revelation to come, and a confirming of the revelation. So it's not, there's no problem, we have no problem with that. As far as the full verse of the talking about the swearing, the public swearing, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَزْوَاجَهُمْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُمْ شُهَدَاء إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَشَهَادَةُ أَحَدِهِمْ أَرْبَعَةُ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ أَنَّهُ لَمِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ وَالْخَامِسَةُ أَنَّ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ. So a man who accuses his wife and has no proof, he makes 4 oaths. This is from the text of the Quran. That he is truthful, and in the fifth one he says, may Allah's curse be on me if I am lying. Okay, and then as far as the rest of the text, the rest of the story we will talk about when we do more of the text. Okay, so from the Dalil point of view, this is another like kind of neat one. I guess I should stop saying that word. It's another organized one in which the Dalil is found in just this 1 or 2 stories, followed by the verses in Surah An-Nur that actually in step-by-step fashion tell us what needs to be done. Okay. Now, so he says, rahimahullah, if a husband charges his wife with adultery, he gets he is subject to the punishment. Now, charging your wife with adultery, other than the fact that it's a big deal, what does that mean in the Sharia? So it could be as explicit of, I accuse you of adultery, or it could be a series of phrases, I'm not going to repeat on camera, but basically curse words that a man would tell his wife that would indicate that he is accusing her of adultery. So why is that important to mention? Well, there's a few things. Number one, the books of fiqh are very explicit. I'm a little shy, but the books of fiqh are very explicit. I mean, the language that I read is pretty intense. Well, maybe I should give a couple of examples just to be clear. So if a man told his wife, you whore, or you're a slut, or something like that, and forgive me for saying those words, those are accusations, because that's what those words mean. So number one, I want you to keep in mind that the fuqaha are very much attuned and in sync with how people talk and how people function. So this idea that the ulama don't know what's going on. You can't be an alim and not know what's going on. So knowing the fiqh is one thing, knowing the Quran and Sunnah is one thing, and then knowing the dunya, the age and the time in which you live is another thing, and then you got to apply those two together. Number two, that a man can't say those words to his wife in general. So those are divorceable terms. If a man told his wife that because he was mad at her and he cursed her, astaghfirullah, even if he said that in public or in a gathering, or she was visiting her family and he said that to her, that's a divorceable offense. So those words are so great. We use them in the fiqh to, okay, does that mean you're accusing her of adultery? And he's like, no, I was just upset. Well, then that's a divorceable offense. What you've just hurt her and injured her, her honor, publicly or even if it's privately. So a woman can, وَتُطْلَقَ الْمَرْأَةِ بِالضَّرَرِ, as the Maliki books of fiqh say, a woman can be divorced due to harm, and that harm includes verbal harm. Let me pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. So, the reason I mention those terms and the books of fiqh mention those terms is that, one, those are terms that are taken to be a euphemism or to be taken to be alluding to adultery. Number two is, therefore, based on what we just said, a man can't generally curse his wife and say those type of words to her. Unfortunately, there is a type of culture of people that men talk to their women like that, and that's something that we must work very, very diligently at eradicating. You cannot talk to your wife like that. You can't talk to anyone like that, really, and vice versa. A woman can't talk to a man like that either. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that, like with all pronouncements, there's going to be the sarih and the kinaya. There's going to be the straightforward, verbatim, I accuse you of adultery. And then usually that's not what happens in these cases, because a man is upset, obviously for obvious reasons, and will say something else. So then the job of the mufti slash ruler or slash qadi is to be able to place those things and put them together. Okay, so if a man does that, عَلَيْهِ حَذْفُ الْقَذْفِ. So automatically, by accusing your woman of that, then you are going to be punished, and that punishment is 80 lashes. 40 for each person, your wife, for accusing your wife and accusing the other person whom you're accusing that she had an adulterous affair with. So it's like a double type of punishment. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say before I moved on. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So related to this is a child out of wedlock. So there is the independent scenario of which a man accuses his wife, finds his wife in a compromising situation, and then throws the charge at her. That's one scenario. The more complete scenario in the Sharia, or the secondary scenario, or not secondary, but the other scenario, is that a woman becomes pregnant, and the man is trying to negate that this is his child. So this is important to recall some of the other fiqh that we have. When we talked about pregnancy and we talked about menstruation and things like that, we said that one of the definitions in the Sharia, or one of the definitions specifically for Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, that the minimal amount of pregnancy is 6 months. Now we have an application for that. So if a woman, if a man has been away from his wife for 6 months or more, and then she has a child, then he's obviously, that's his proof. His proof is, well, I've been gone. But if a man has been gone for 3 months and then comes back, and then accuses her and she's pregnant, well, you were only gone for 3 months, so this could be your child. So that's not proof enough, in which case you would have to do the public imprecation, the mula'ana. So I mentioned that because sometimes when you take part of the fiqh and learn part of the rules and definitions, they kind of don't make sense, or you give up. You don't see that they have application. But whatever we said in the beginning of the book will always carry through to the end of the book, and vice versa. So once you go through the whole thing, inshallah, with me, and we go through the whole text, we ask Allah to give us tawfiq in that, then you can pick and choose and kind of know things. But you got to go through the whole thing at least once to understand that these definitions are consistent. So that definition now has an actual application, and then the justice system, or the judge, or the mufti, qadi, or the mufti, will be able to use that. Is that proof or not? Another thing with the accusation/proof is that it does not have to be the proof at the level of there's 4 eyewitnesses for the act of penetration, which we talk about in crimes and punishments for zina. This is a little bit different. So if he says in the Hashiyah, for example, if a man finds his wife in a khalwa with a man, or in a compromising situation, but not actually seeing the act, it's ghalabatul dhann. So you have enough doubt that it's risen to the point where you can make this accusation, and that would be the proof in that case. So the burden here is a little bit different. And then we'll talk about the child. So the child, that's another thing I want to mention. A man wants to negate lineage to the child, you have to do that right away. In this case, a man can't have the child and then a year later he's like, this is not my child, he doesn't look like me. That doesn't work, because you have had the opportunity to do that. This is like, he says, you buy something, okay, from the store, like I buy this little remote control that I use in my camera, and there's an aib in it, there's a defect in it. I got to go back. Remember we said we have 3 days to return it in general. But if I had this for a month and then a month later I'm like, you know what, it's broken, I can't return it at that point. This is the same thing. If the man is going to negate the paternity of the child, he has to do that right away, in which case, otherwise the child is his, lil-firash, and then therefore he will not be able to negate it. Okay. Al-Bayyina, we talked about that. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Sometimes I always want to tell you stuff when I'm preparing, and then when I come to record I can't find them. I'm having one of those moments, but inshallah it will come. Okay. If a husband charges his wife with adultery, we talked about that now, he is subject to punishment, the 80 lashes, we talked about that. For charging another with adultery, well, in this case he's charging 2, really he's charging his wife and the person who he's accusing her of having an adulterous affair with. Unless he brings proof, so we talked about a little bit about the proof, or makes a public imprecation against her, al-mula'ana. Now, the public imprecation must involve a third party. So it must involve, the word that we use here is al-hakim. So al-hakim doesn't mean like the khalifa has to come and like attend to every little thing, but the person that is deputized by the khalifa or the sultan or the emir or the imam. Imam here meaning the political imam. Who are the people that are deputized? Well, the muftis and the courts and the imams and things like that. Those people are deputized. So there has to be talqeen, which is to say and then it's repeated. So repeat after me, right? That's the talqeen. So a man can't just do this on his own in a public space. There has to be the talqeen of the hakim, in Aramaic, between brackets, the deputy of the hakim, a representative of the legislated person or agent to do that, because in the talqeen before the fifth one, the mulaqin, the one who's going to do that, who's going to say repeat after me, has to say, before you say this next one, please remember the enormity of lying. Please remember the punishment of the hereafter. Please remember that the punishment of this world is easier than the hereafter. It's a very emotional thing. I think I've read maybe a couple of historic cases of that. I mean, it's very, it's shudder like. I would never want to be in that. I would never want to be witness to that, or the mulaqin, or God forbid, I would never would want that for me or for you to be that. But unfortunately, like we said, the Sharia is dealing with the reality of the human condition, and it has happened, and it happened at the time of the Prophet. Anyway, the point I want to mention is that it's not in the text, but it's part of the fiqh. That's a condition. The condition is that there has to be that third party that's doing that for it to count. So it's considered a condition of the mula'ana. As I'm wrapping up this, there, I found what I wanted to say. As far as the accusing the wife of the adultery and the child, we said that there doesn't have to be like the 4 eyewitnesses, but he has to have ghalabat al-dhann. He has to have an overwhelming amount of suspicion and doubt with some proof. فَإِن لَمْ يَعْلَمْ زَنَاهَا وَلَمْ يُظُنُّهُ ظَنًّا مُؤَكَّدًا. If he does not have that high level of doubt, حرم عليه قذفها ولعنها ولو كان هناك ولد لأنه يلحق بالفراش. In that case, it's haram for him to engage in the public accusation, and then the child in which he's showing doubt will be his child. So this is something in which the man must make sure he has an overwhelming amount of reason to do so. And we'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. All right. So let's do the next section, which is if he chooses to make a public imprecation, so he has no proof, and he just wants to negate the child altogether, and obviously he doesn't want to get whipped 80 times, then he's going to make the public imprecation. So he says, while in the presence of the judge and a group while standing on the mimbar. Presence of a judge / deputized person. So it could be like the imam of the mosque, it could be a mufti, qadi, etc. A group, it has to be at least 4 people. And then the mimbar, what he means by that, it doesn't have to be in the mosque, but the mosque is the place where we witness public things. So it's in the case where people take their shahada, it's a case where we do the janazah, so on and so forth. So the mimbar is a place of wa'adh, it's a place of reminding, and it's a place of irshad, a place of guidance, actual structure, which comes from the mimbar of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the mosque is a sacred space. So the idea of doing it in a sacred space is that it's to emphasize on the person that's about to engage in this, and also the woman who's going to then repeat, counter that. It emphasizes the great enormity of what you're about to engage in. Now, what happens if in a Muslim country there are non-Muslim citizens, that is, that are going to engage in the mula'ana? In that case, we go to their sacred spaces. So you would go to a synagogue for a Jew or a church for a Christian, and then he says for people that are mulhideen, people that are atheists basically, then you go to the courthouse because they have no deen, but they'll understand the enormity of the law. So the point is to do it in a public space that person holds as sacred. And the word sacred doesn't necessarily mean sacred religiously, but sacred as in there's a secular sacred, like the flag of the country and the constitution. I mean, there's sacred things civically. They're They're the topmost things that we have. That's sort of what we mean by that. So there is dispensation, obviously, for that, for the reasons that we just mentioned. So it doesn't have to be in the mosque, but if it is in a mosque, it's in the jama, the big mosque, the grand mosque, the mosque where we do Jummah. Remember, there are the traditional fiqh, the pre-modern fiqh is that there's only one Jummah, and that Jummah takes place in the Jama. So all of the other zawaya, mosques and things like that close on Jummah, and there's supposed to be one Jummah. I mean, obviously now that's impossible because there's like a gazillion people everywhere. I mean, even in the West, we have the same mosque has multiple Jummahs because we don't have enough space. That's a dispensation. And it's Sharqawi, Abdullah Sharqawi, rahimahullah, from the Shafi'is, and he was Shaykh al-Azhar radiallahu anhu. He talked about that at his time. He was the Shaykh al-Azhar at the time of the Napoleon invasion in Egypt, so late 1700s. So he's saying at that time in Egypt, there's too many people, so we have to have multiple Jummahs. So now in Egypt or Delhi or Damascus or Istanbul or London or anywhere Paris, I mean, there's so many Muslims, mashallah, that even one Jummah in one mosque is not enough. So I'm just saying that when he talks about mosque, he's in his mind, he's the mental image is that the main mosque, right? So this is the main place where Muslims go to take care of their public affairs, and the minbar is, as we said, a holy place, etc. And then based on that for the other religions or people of no faith at all. So if he chooses to do the public imprecation, he says, while in the presence of a judge, so that's a condition because they have to do the talqeen, they have to coach him to tell him what to say, repeat after me, in a group, at least 4 people, because 4 people is the minimal amount to witness the fornication punishment. That comes from the text of the Quran. Standing on the minbar, it's not a requirement, but the idea is so he's seen, okay? And then he's going to say the following: I bear witness to Allah that I am truthful in charging my wife so-and-so with fornication. If the wife is present, he has to point to her, he has to say her name if she's absent. And that this child, you have to add that if the child is involved, is the product of adultery and not mine. So this is a text. So the deputy of the government or the deputized person, it's just like in the nikah. So repeat after me. I, and state your name, bear witness to Allah, so on and so forth. This woman, point to your wife or say her full name. So it's a formal contract type of language that is used. It's also a sunnah to do this after Asr prayer. And there's a text involved about that. Which comes from in Bukhari. 3 people that Allah Ta'ala will not talk to them Yawm al-Qiyamah and will not purify them, and they have a terrible torment. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. One of them is رجل حلف على يمين كاذبة بعد العصر, a man who bears a false testimony after Asr. So the reason we have that we'll do it after Asr as a sunnah is that the hakim, the mufti, qadi, imam, that person is going to mention all of these things in the public gathering to the man. In other words, you're giving so there's like a little bit of an intro. We are here to do this public imprecation, this la'an, and we've chosen this sacred space at this sacred time because of the Prophet ﷺ said such and such. So all of these things are meant to let the man think, maybe I shouldn't do this. Because if he's lying, then he's asking Allah, astaghfirullah, Allah's wrath to be upon him. I mean, you don't want to do that. If it took place in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, it would also be on the minbar, because the Prophet ﷺ said, as is narrated by Ibn Hibban and Al-Nisa'i and Al-Hakim, من حلف على منبر هذا يمينا آثما تبوأ مقعده من النار. Whoever swears a false testimony on my minbar here, let them await their seat in the hellfire. If it took place in the mosque in Jerusalem, may Allah Ta'ala free Jerusalem from its occupation, it would take place under the Dome of the Rock because that is its most holy place. And if it took place in the Haram al-Sharif in Mecca, you would do it between the Rukn and the maqam, because that's one of the sunnah places to do it. Okay, and then any other mosque, including the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, we said is the mimbar. Jama'at min nas, we said at least 4. Okay, and then as far as the public thing that he says, if the woman is not present, he has to mention where she is. Mentioning her name, we said that. And, this woman, the son of so and so, to mention her nasab, so that she can be properly identified and that there's no confusion. And then, of course, if the child is involved, he's going to mention the child is not his. And then he says this 4 times. So the imam, mufti, qadi, etc., mufti, whatever, coaches him to say it 4 times. On the 5th time, he says, the 5th time after the judge warns him of the consequences of lying, he says, and may the curse of Allah be upon me if I'm a liar. So that's the climax of this scene, is that there's the warning in the beginning. Well, there's the warning embedded in the situation because of the place, the time in which this public thing is going to happen. You have to do this publicly. And then the climax of it is after the 4th one, before the 5th one. The imam tells him, look, and he can take as much time as he wants about the enormity of sinning, the sin of lying. Some of the hadith that we just mentioned, if you lie after Asr, Allah doesn't look at you. Astaghfirullah azim, if you lie on the mimbar, so on and so forth. And then if the man is not shaken by that, he says the 5th time, and may the curse of Allah, he says the whole thing that he just said 4 times in a row. He says it a 5th time, concluding with, and may the curse of Allah be upon me if I'm a liar. So that's pretty dramatic, and I know I'm kind of like leaving you on a cliffhanger because there's more to come, but I think that's enough for you to get for today's topic. It also said, I should mention, that this happened once at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and did not happen again until the time of the Khilafah of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz under the Umayyads radiallahu anhu. So this is something that in the early generation obviously didn't happen like on a day-to-day basis. I don't have statistics, or I can't remember from the history books how often it happens, but it does happen, and you'll find situations of that. But it is an enormous thing. It should not be taken lightly. And we'll leave it there. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's class we took, I would say, about half of the section of charging one's wife with adultery. I gave a lot of background, I think, about the theory behind it, the 2 stories that we have in the hadith literature about the reason why those verses in Surah An-Nur were revealed. And we learned that it's okay that if we have 2 or multiple stories for the reason of the revelation of one verse or one set of rulings, one story doesn't negate the other. And then we said that the charge of adultery itself is an offense to the person making the charge. So if you charge somebody with adultery, the default is you're going to be punished, unless you bring proof, and if it's your wife, you do the public imprecation. Proof, we said, is overwhelming assumption. With something, you saw them in a compromising situation, place, or something like that. Short of that, it doesn't count. The proof doesn't count. If a child is involved, then the negation has to happen right away, and part of the proof can be the minimum amount of pregnancy has passed, which is 6 months in the Shafi'i madhab. We talked a little bit about why that's important. If you do the public imprecation, we said that it's got to be done with an agent of the state. So there's got to be an imam, mufti, qadi that is telling the man, repeat after me, and we choose the mosque, a public place, a sacred place. If it's a person of another faith, their sacred places. If it's a person of no faith, then the place of the state. And we choose after Asr prayer for the hadith that we mentioned. And the man has to say this publicly, at least 4 witnesses, that he has to mention his wife by name or point to her if she's there, negate the child, And he says that 4 times in a row. And then after the 5th time, he says, may the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on me if I'm lying. And before he says the 5th time, the agent of the state tells the man and reminds him of the enormity of lying and the enormity of what he's about to do and the consequences of what's going to happen, which we will come to see in tomorrow's class. So that's the climax of it, and then he has to say that. That's the fiqh of what we took, and I tried to talk a little bit about some of the auxiliary issues related to that. But the full picture will not come into focus until tomorrow's lecture, when we conclude it, to see what are the fiqh results of this public imprecation and what can the woman do to protect herself. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.